Yeah, if you're 5 years old and you spill your milk and it's the end of the world, that may have actually been the worst thing that's ever happened to you.
Right, literally, by definition, your spectrum is very small. That might be the worst thing you've experienced yet.
I'm Maya Lane.
And I'm Michael, and we're on the grad school journey to becoming licensed therapists.
Come with us to class as we discuss and dissect all we can learn about mental health, relationships, therapy techniques, and everything in between.
With your two favorite therapists in training, this is Therapy in Progress.
Hey, Michael.
The hiatus is over.
It's over.
We're back. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling much better now. I was sick for like 2 weeks.
Maya had the plague. I'm glad you're still with us.
Me too. I nearly died, but
You feeling okay?
Yeah, I'm feeling okay now. A little bit of the sniffles, a little bit of a lingering cough, but otherwise I'm good.
Okay, I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
A lot has changed. We had our break between semesters.
Yes.
We have now officially started year 2 of our program.
Let's go!
Which is crazy.
Yeah, I'm halfway there.
Yeah, that's crazy, and I'm just about. How is your semester going so far?
My semester's going well. Right now I'm learning about how to take assessments.
Nice.
So getting into that. And then also I'm in practicum.
Yes.
So that means I've started seeing clients.
You're doing it.
I'm doing the thing.
You're doing the thing. We'll talk about it in a future episode. I'm very excited to hear. Yeah, I'm taking a research methods class. I'm also taking a vocational psychology class, so talking all about careers and career counseling and stuff like that. And then second half of summer, I will be taking a multicultural kind of cultural sensitivity counseling class, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah, that'll be amazing. I took that one actually in the second summer session.
How was it?
It was really good.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the class.
Awesome. I feel like there's so much to learn in terms of breaking out of our kind of lens of the culture we grew up in naturally is what we're used to.
Right.
But you're going to have clients coming to you from all different backgrounds whose perceptions and assumptions about the world are not necessarily the same as yours. So knowing how to be sensitive to that.
Yeah. And also knowing where your blind spots are.
Yeah.
Like a lot of times for us here in the US, we just think of like an individualistic culture as being standard.
Yeah.
But if you have a client who's coming from a more collectivistic culture and you're imposing your views onto them, that could really impact the therapeutic alliance.
Yeah, I think about that a lot when I moved away. I'm from California. I moved away to New York, which was really hard for me to be so far away from my family. But in my head, I was like, that's what you're supposed to do. You leave home and you go to the big city and you make your way. Yeah. And then one day I realized that's a very like Americanized, individualistic style of life. A lot of other cultures, you never leave your home community. Yeah. Family is the most important thing, and you stay close to your upbringing and to your roots. I'm not saying one is correct or incorrect. I just think it's interesting that I, being American growing up in California, in my head I had it so clear that like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do, when in fact, who's to say?
Right.
There's a lot of different supposed tos depending on what culture you're from. Yeah.
So that's really common. It's a really common thing that therapists have to grapple with, of like, where are my blind spots, and then how do I meet clients where they're at?
Absolutely.
Which brings us to our topic of the day, which is parenting styles.
Yes, we are going to be talking about the 4 different parenting styles that are generally talked about, which is super interesting. Before we jump into it, though, something you and I were talking about, just our kind of angle into this episode, because people listening may or may not be a parent, but everybody was raised by someone.
Right.
So this topic is really, really important, even if you yourself are not raising someone. The way that you were raised and whatever parenting style your guardians or caretakers or parents used will probably be using the word parents, but of course there's a lot of different ways to be raised. Whatever they used is really going to affect your attachment styles, throwback to our other episode, and who you become in your relationships with others. It really affects
the way you move throughout the world.
Yeah, how you were raised really affects a lot.
Yeah. So we're hoping that we can give everybody some insights on how they were parented and maybe how that's affecting them today.
Yeah. And then if you are a parent yourself, different things to consider, how to discipline, how to structure a relationship with a child. There's a lot to consider.
Yeah, there is. And also, we just want to give a little bit of compassion, a little bit of grace, because there are a lot of obstacles to parenting. Not all of us were given the tools growing up to be able to know how to parent effectively, but giving yourself grace and knowing that just listening to this podcast is a lens in, a way into expanding your knowledge so that you can reparent yourself or become a better parent for yourself, for your children.
That is so true. Something that I want to mention is that I don't think I'm being hyperbolic when I say I literally don't know a single person whose parents did not screw them up in some special little tiny way. I was literally, I knew I wanted to make this point. So when I was brushing my teeth this morning, I was going through everyone I know, and I literally was like, can I think of a single person, even with the best parents, the best loving families? It's not a perfect science. Like, your parents are going to drop the ball at some point in some different way, no matter who you are or where you come from. And I think that's true with everybody I know.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's true.
So I think that compassion that you're talking about is really important, not only if you are a parent to know that you are going to screw things up, you are going to do things wrong, but also if you are the child, to look back at your parents and have that forgiveness and have that compassion that they did the best they could with the tools that they had at the time.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that we're okay with maybe how we were raised, but having that that understanding of maybe this is why.
Absolutely. That's a good point, that like sometimes people objectively parent very poorly. So it's not to necessarily forgive what was done, but like you said, to forgive the fact that nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to be a shitty parent today. You know, those things happen because of where the person is, the tools that they have or don't have, what is going on in their life at the time.
Yeah.
Should we jump in?
Let's jump into it.
Okay, so we have 4 different parenting styles to talk about.
Yes.
One of them is considered the goal.
Yes.
The other 3 are not.
Correct.
Which I think is really interesting.
Very similar to attachment styles.
Very similar to attachment styles. They really do go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And we'll draw those parallels. For anybody listening, if you need a refresher, go back and listen to our attachment styles episode, because these really do go hand in hand.
They do.
So what are the 4 different parenting styles? Let's list them first.
So the gold standard is going to be authoritative, not to be confused with authoritarian, which is the next.
A classic addition of psychological terms being confusingly named. You have authoritative, which is good, and authoritarian, which is not the goal.
Right. So we have authoritative, we have authoritarian, then we have permissive and neglectful.
Yes. Do you want to maybe start with the 3 not ideal ones, and then that'll lead us into authoritative?
Let's do that.
Okay, where do you want to start?
So let's start with authoritarian.
Okay.
Yeah.
Authoritarian parenting is that kind of stereotypical strict parent. This is all about discipline and rules, and the tagline of authoritarian parenting is, because I said so. That's the quote. And what that kind of highlights is this lack of communication. What you'll notice a theme in all of these parenting styles is the level of communication that's either there or not there. With authoritarian parenting, it's very much, these are the rules and you don't get to know why, but you have to follow them, and if you don't, you will be disciplined.
Authoritarian, yes, it has these strict rules. It has this emphasis on obedience rather than reasoning. There's very little collaboration. And the way that I want to scale all of these is based on warmth and control. So authoritarian is going to be high control, low warmth.
That's great. All of these parenting styles are going to kind of exist on this like XY axes of like warmth and control, as you just said. So different levels of each.
Yeah.
So like you just said, this one is
high control, low warmth.
Okay. And I like what you said about collaboration, because there is this kind of maybe old-fashioned understanding that what the parent says goes and the child doesn't have a say. What you'll see in a more authoritative, which we'll get to later, or a more perhaps modern parenting style, is a little bit more of a give and take between what does the child actually need, what information do they need, what communication do they need to understand why I'm placing these rules and why the consequences will be what they will be if the rules aren't followed.
Yeah, because if the rules and the structure is not followed up by the reason, then the child never really learns why.
Yeah. And we also see a lot with authoritarian parenting when the kid starts to get a little bit older, maybe becomes a teenager, maybe leaves the house, goes to college. There is this huge rebellion because there is this wanting to push back and push against that strict upbringing. So you'll kind of get one of 2 things. You'll either get the really rebellious adolescent who's getting into trouble.
Because they get to explore themselves for the first time. They get to have all these experiences that they weren't allowed to have before.
Right. They never had a chance to do that. So then they go overboard and they say, okay, I'm going to really break out and do everything I've ever wanted to do.
Yeah.
You'll either see that, or kind of on the other end of the spectrum, you might have someone who kind of carries that authoritarianism with them and is really afraid of authority figures, of discipline, of trouble of any kind. So it can be tough.
Yeah, it can be really tough. Also, I mean, I've also heard the saying, and I've known people in my own life, where strict parenting just makes sneaky kids. So it could be that you're a very, very strict parent, or your parent was very, very strict, but then you found your ways around it.
Yeah, because
And
kids are smart.
yes, they are. They're smarter than you.
They're smarter than you think.
Yeah.
So it's like, I love that strict parents make sneaky kids. It's not that you're going to stop the kid from doing the thing. You're going to stop the kid from talking to you about the thing.
What you've done is create an environment that is unsafe for them to talk to you and disclose things that
Yes.
may be going on in their lives that they might need parental guidance for, but they may be afraid to come to you about it.
Yes, because for better or for worse, high school is high school, right? Kids are going to experiment with different things. The question is not, are they going to do it? Because they are savvy enough to get it done. The question is, are you going to be a space where they can come and safely talk to you about it so that they make good decisions?
Yeah.
And that they learn about safety and they learn how to, within reason, make safe and good decisions.
Kids are going to make the wrong choice. They're going to make mistakes. That's just a normal part of being human and a normal part of being growing up. And it's really important to have a safe space you can go to be able to learn how to navigate your way out of those situations.
Yes.
And also to realize a lot of times that it's not so bad. It's not the end of the world that X, Y, and Z is happening, but there's a way for you to come out of it on the other side and learn instead of just feeling stuck.
Yeah. So to kind of contextualize this a little bit, I think you and me, our generation, I think a lot of our parents were parented by authoritarian parents.
Yes.
So our grandparents, kind of that silent generation,
Yeah.
that was for many, many, many generations, probably centuries, it was kind of the standard. And I think we've modernized a little bit, which we will get to with the other styles.
Yeah. It was an emphasis on control and obedience rather than on, really hearing the kid out.
Yeah. Shall we move on?
Yeah.
What's next?
Let's dive into permissive parenting.
This one's really interesting.
Yeah. So on the scale, this one is more on the high warmth, low control.
So kind of the opposite of authoritarian.
Exactly.
High warmth, low control. So the tagline, each of them kind of has a tagline, right? With authoritarian, it was because I said so. With permissive, this one is more of, I want my child to be my friend.
So prioritizing friendship over discipline.
Yes. So permissive on the surface might sound kind of nice. It might sound like the teenager's dream, right? It's the parent that is your friend and lets you get away with things.
The
and
cool parent.
The cool parent doesn't really have many rules, things like that. But as you can imagine, that runs into its fair share of problems. Because what happens when we have low structure, no rules, low discipline, what can happen?
What happens for a kid is that they can be really impulsive because there were never limits placed on their behaviors and what they can and cannot do. So there's a lack of boundaries.
Yeah.
So you don't learn what boundaries are because they were never set for you. So you never learned how to set them for yourself. So this can really affect self-esteem. It can affect confidence. So even though you may have had this varied experience and you can go to your parents to discuss it, there still there's no discipline, there's no limits, and there's no boundaries.
Which, kind of going back to our attachment styles, this oftentimes ties into a rather anxious attachment style.
Right.
Because self-sufficiency in terms of emotion was never modeled for you. So you were never really modeled how to healthily navigate some of those feelings. So you might grow up really needing validation and support and attention and that more anxious attachment style.
Yeah, so it becomes an emotional reliance on maybe your partner in adulthood or other figures in adulthood because you don't know how to give that to yourself.
Yeah. And something more, we were talking about the theme of like communication that runs through all of these. There's oftentimes something with permissive parenting when you have that more kind of friendship relationship with your parent, that your parent is oversharing and is placing their emotional burden on you. And the parent is going to the child for support and maybe even telling the child about, the inner workings of the marriage or things that are inappropriate to be sharing with your child.
Right. This can be referred to as emotional incest, where the parent is placing too much of an emotional burden onto the child. They're relying on their child to meet their emotional needs rather than another adult. So it's an inappropriate relationship in that way.
Yeah, in an emotional way. Absolutely. Huge myth-busting moment. Everybody on the internet has heard the term gentle parenting.
Yep.
Gentle parenting is not permissive parenting. Gentle parenting, if done correctly, is actually a really good thing. But people a lot of the time hear that, they hear the phrase gentle parenting, and they define it incorrectly as permissive, or they think it is what permissive parenting is.
Because a lot of times what people think when they hear gentle parenting is like your child's having a temper tantrum in the store. It's like, oh, honey, it's okay.
Let them do their thing.
Like you're having really big feelings right now, and they're like screaming and crying and throwing toys all over the place. And
People think gentle parenting is about a lack of boundaries, a lack of control, a lack of rules. That is not true. We will get into what it actually is, because gentle parenting, if done correctly, is actually authoritative parenting, which we'll get to at the end.
yes.
What people think it is this permissive parenting, which is not ideal. This lack of structure, lack of rules, lack of boundaries that we were talking about.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I when people have a problem with gentle parenting, I get what they mean, because they think they're referring to permissive parenting, which I agree. It's not ideal, because you are lacking the responsibility that a parent probably should have. You know?
I do want to mention that oftentimes permissive parenting is rooted in parental guilt or a fear of conflict. So it could be that there's something going on within the family structure that the parent feels guilty about. Like maybe they're working too much, they feel like they're not giving their child enough, and their way to compensate for that lacking, their perceived lacking, is through being more permissive, giving more warmth, and unfortunately establishing less boundaries, less discipline.
Yeah. Shall we move on to the third of this first chunk, which is neglectful parenting?
Yeah.
Okay, talk to me about that.
Neglectful parenting is it's detached. So I think oftentimes when we think of neglect, we more often think of physical neglect. So not having food or shelter or basic necessities. That is one aspect of neglect, but it can also be emotional neglect.
What does that look like?
So it's having a parent who's not emotionally there for you. They're more absent. So in the scaling, it would be low control and it would be low warmth. So it's a parent who's just not there. And these parents typically look like parents who are struggling with mental health, substance abuse issues.
Oftentimes this is seen in parents with personality disorders. So if your parent was narcissistic, unable to center their child instead of centering themselves.
Right. It can also come from parental burnout. Just having way too much going on and then just completely shutting down. Or trauma. If there was a trauma and you just cannot show up for your kids, it can stem from that as well.
So this will often coincide with, when the person is growing up, with attachment styles, with either an avoidant attachment style, because remember what we had talked about in that previous episode is avoidance shows up when someone's emotional needs in childhood were not met.
Right.
So now they have walls up. Or in the worst case, this could even be a disorganized attachment style. If there's trauma and emotional trauma involved, that person could end up disorganized.
If there's no control and there's no warmth, for a child, that can be a very unsafe environment. So it's very likely for a disorganized attachment to arise just because of the higher likelihood of trauma being experienced.
And one other thing that I want to mention about neglectful parenting style, this is often the kind of person who says, I had to grow up really fast. Because this is somebody who emotionally at least had to learn self-sufficiency at a very early age.
Right.
Because they were not being emotionally supported by their caretaker.
This can also happen for glass children. So if you haven't heard of this,
can you define that? What does that mean?
Yeah, so glass children is the well child of a sibling who has a mental illness or developmental disorder. So this could be, for example, like autism, ADHD, things like that.
Intellectual disability.
Intellectual disabilities, Down syndrome, chronic illnesses. So this is the sibling of that child who has now, because their sibling needs so much attention and needs so much care from the parents, they don't get as much attention, they don't get as many of their needs met, and oftentimes are given a lot of responsibility very early on.
So in that case, the neglectful parenting, in a way, it's not from a lack of love or a lack of caring, but it was just almost a necessity in a way of the parent's time and attention was elsewhere.
Right.
So that child ends up being pushed a little bit to the side and feeling neglected emotionally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily the fault of the parent that they are in this situation. It's just they didn't have the tools or the capacity to be able to do it all. So it's not for, like you were saying, it's not for lack of care or not for lack of love, but just not having the ability.
Right. Shall we transition into the parenting style that is more of the goal?
Let's get into authoritative parenting.
Okay, so again, authoritarian and authoritative are different. This is authoritative, which
This is the gold standard.
yeah, this is where you want to get. So authoritative is all about clear boundaries. What people might think gentle parenting is, as we were saying earlier, is a lack of certain things. It's not that. What it really is, it's about communication. So you're going to have rules, you're going to have boundaries, you're going to have discipline even. But the difference is you're going to tell the child what is happening and why. You are going to communicate, hey, I need you not to do this thing for this reason. I need you to do this thing for this reason. And if you do this thing or don't do this thing, this is what will happen and here's why. So you were saying collaboration.
Yes.
That's all we mean. By collaboration, it means bringing the child into the process of this is why things are the way they are. It's because I am trying to give you, or I am trying to prevent for you, or whatever the reasoning is. It works wonders if you communicate that.
Yeah, having a dialogue. So you can set your expectations and you can set your rules. Absolutely, and you should. It just comes down to explaining why and then answering the questions that you get in return.
Yes. If a child asks why, don't say because I said so. Say, okay, here's why.
Yeah.
This is the logic, because theoretically, if you are parenting with all cylinders firing, you're making decisions based on the best interest of the child.
Yeah.
So if the child says, but why can't I go out? Why can't I go have the sleepover with my friend? Instead of saying, because I said so, you say, well, because tonight is a school night. And at this point in your life, we really need to prioritize responsibility and education. So I need you to stay home and do your homework.
Yeah.
Instead of arbitrarily, or what might feel to the child like arbitrarily, enforcing rules for the sake of enforcing rules.
Right.
Right.
So this can encourage emotional regulation. So because the child knows why these rules are being put into place, they can reason better, they can have more logic skills, and they can be able to recognize in themselves, oh, this is why this rule is in place. So it brings a sense of safety, and they can then regulate themselves because they know why. There's an understanding there. If they're confused, they could get dysregulated more easily. But if you have that understanding, then you can settle down.
Absolutely. And the other huge thing about authoritative parenting, which I think is why sometimes it blurs into that gentle parenting misconception, is because there is an emphasis also on the child's emotional experience, making space for that, making that part of the process.
Yeah.
So, again, this maybe is a more new age parenting style, but is good, is because children oftentimes are not well emotionally regulated because they are still building those skills. They are building, their brains are not yet at the point where they can regulate their own emotions effectively.
Yeah, if you're 5 years old and you spill your milk and it's the end of the world, that may have actually been the worst thing that's ever happened to you.
Right, literally, by definition, your spectrum is very small. That might be the worst thing you've experienced yet. So, part of authoritative parenting is not being permissive with a child's emotional expression, but understanding and talking through with them, hey, what are you going through right now? Can you communicate to me what you're going through right now? And telling them, okay, the way you're showing it either is appropriate or isn't appropriate,
Yeah.
So sometimes people go overboard, and you'll see online what you were talking about, that example of the kid melting down in the grocery store, and the parents say, okay, let's just let them have their moment. No, that's not ideal.
Yeah.
What would be ideal is, instead of disciplining that child and telling that child to be quiet and stop misbehaving, is to get on their level and try to figure out, okay, what is going on? What has dysregulated you?
Yeah.
And let me make space for that and kind of help you through it.
Yes. Right. And something that can happen is when a child is having a temper tantrum or having a meltdown, the caregiver can get dysregulated in themselves. May that be the temper tantrum itself or other things going on, and this is just on top of it. The parent can get dysregulated and may not respond in the way that they would ideally want to. So it's being able in that moment to bring yourself in and say, okay, this is where I'm at. How do I want to respond?
It takes a lot of emotional maturity and a lot of emotional insight to effectively use authoritative parenting.
It does.
Because you have to be mature enough to center the child's experience and be kind of a guide and a modeler of what needs to be done.
Yeah.
That's tough to do. Not every parent can do that if they themselves don't have, as you were saying, the emotional faculties
Yeah.
to navigate it in that way.
Yeah. So having compassion for that, having compassion for yourself in those moments, because no parent is perfect. You're not going to respond perfectly every single time. There are going to be times when you yell. There are
Of
going to be
course.
times when you're dysregulated and you respond a way that you wouldn't have wanted to otherwise. And then it's a matter of confronting that, maybe with your child, and saying, hey, I got a little stressed out and I said something that I didn't mean, and I'm sorry.
Wow. Can you imagine a world in which parents regularly would apologize to their children when they did things wrong?
It would be a much more compassionate world, for sure.
Because you're so right. There is nothing wrong with a parent modeling that for a child and going to the child and saying, hey, I did that poorly, or I'm sorry about the way that came out.
Yeah.
Imagine then how much the child is learning in that moment about how to handle your own mistakes. That's really powerful.
It's incredibly powerful.
And I have a hunch that a lot of us, 90% of the world, probably didn't experience that from their parents very much, because that's not something that parents tend to do.
Parents try so hard to be perfect. And there's absolutely no way you can be, because parents are still human beings.
It's their first time living too.
Yes. And we're going to make mistakes, all of us. Confronting those mistakes doesn't make you a bad parent. Being able to admit fault does not make you a bad parent.
In fact, it makes you a stronger parent, I think.
It does. It absolutely does, because like you were saying, it models for your child, like, okay, this person I idealize, my parent, my caregiver, my guardian, they're not perfect either. They can give themselves grace, and they know when to apologize when they've done something wrong. So it's okay for me to do that too.
If the young person is seeing that their role model is allowed to be flawed, they understand that they too can be flawed. A great example that I like with authoritative parenting is the moody, rude teenager who doesn't want to talk to their parents and gets in a fight and slams the door. What the authoritative parent would do in that case is talk to the child and be like, hey, two things are true at once. Number one, I can see that you're going through something, a hard time right now. I'd love to talk about it. I'd love to know what you're going through. I'd love to figure out some coping mechanisms. At the same time, I, as the parent, am going to establish you cannot talk to me that way. You can't be slamming doors. You can't be storming away from the dinner table. And here's why. It's not respectful to me. It's not respectful to the family. And we can learn better communication. So boom, right there, we hit all the bases.
Yes.
You validated the child's experience. You created room for them to tell you what you're going through. But you also established, hey, I'm setting up some expectations, and here's why you can't behave this way. That's all authoritative parenting is.
Here's the boundary, and here's why.
Did we say where it falls on the axis?
High warmth, high control.
High warmth, high control. That's what people don't get.
Yes.
It's not high warmth, low control. It's high warmth,
High control.
high control. So you are in charge while still maintaining understanding and warmth and a loving environment.
Yeah. This also relates back to secure attachment.
Which, as you might remember, is kind of the gold standard of what we might be striving for an attachment style.
Right. So authoritative parenting styles lead to secure attachments for children as they grow into adulthood. Yeah. And the reason for that is because it's created that safe environment and that secure attachment, that ability to have a collaborative relationship where, yes, there are boundaries. Yes, there is warmth. You can have both.
Absolutely.
You can have that open dialogue while still setting limits and rules.
Well said. I'm interested in how patterns are broken or how patterns continue. Because you kind of see two ends of the spectrum. You see people who say, my parents were this way and I never want to be like them, so I'm going to parent this other way. Or you see people who end up being the parents that they had because they carry on those patterns.
Because it's what they know. It's
what they
familiar
know.
to them.
So I think that has a lot to do with the level of reflection and the level of insight a person has. So if somebody has a lot of insight and has reflected on their upbringing and has kind of worked through their relationship with their parents in their own mind, that person is more likely to take the things that worked, to leave out the things that didn't work, to kind of design how they want to parent, what they want to do and not do based on their own experience as a child.
Yeah.
Someone with little insight, who has not really noticed patterns or thought about these things consciously, is likely to just kind of replicate what their parents did because, like you said, that's all they know. That's what was modeled for them. That is the reality they lived in. So That said, I would encourage as much insight as possible so that you can not just subconsciously carry on whatever parent style you were shown, but you can more actively design your own based on what worked and what didn't work. So that's my 2 cents on insight.
Yeah, because if you have that insight, then you can really step into your power and make the decision for yourself.
Yeah.
Really take on that autonomy to say, these things didn't work for me growing up. Here's how I'm going to respond for myself right now, and then maybe for my future children or for my children right now.
Instead of having your parents parent your child without you even realizing it's happening.
Yeah. So it could be that, so that's how the generational trauma happens. That's how intergenerational curses, some people like to call them, happen, where there are these patterns or things that are passed down grandparent to child. Mm-hmm. But being able to have the insights can give you the power to disrupt those patterns and stop the curse here.
Yeah.
And again, you're never going to do that perfectly. And sometimes people overcompensate, sometimes people still replicate what their parents did. But being able to be cognizant of it and correct it when it does happen, that's where the power is.
Totally. You ever have that moment where you say something, you're like, damn, that was my mom. Or,
yes.
Or oh, that was my dad. Mm-hmm. It's like, those things it's the fabric of who we are, so of course it's going to burst out at points.
Yeah. Have you heard your parents say that ever? I've heard my dad say it. He said it a few times that he's like, oh, that's my mom. Or my mom will call it out. She'll be like, that's your mom.
That's funny.
So I grew up hearing that. So now I'm very cognizant of how my parents' parenting has impacted me because I saw my parents talk about it amongst themselves.
Yeah. One more thing kind of tying into what you were saying about the generational trauma. Can we talk, kind of tying this back to the beginning of the episode, we were saying how culture is an important part of this.
Right.
How does culture and your cultural background play into the different parenting styles?
Yeah, so different cultures prioritize different parenting styles. So like we were saying that maybe the silent generation was more authoritarian, and that was what was culturally accepted then. There are cultures today that are still authoritarian or maybe more permissive, just based on whether that be a religious context or that's cultural based on where they grew up, or just the family dynamic based on the family of origin.
A lot of heavily patriarchal cultures tend to be pretty authoritarian because it's that idea of like the man is the sole authority in the household. What he says goes, no questions. So we want to always be sensitive to the expectations of different cultures while still pointing out that objectively some things make happier, healthier humans when they grow up and some things don't.
Yeah.
So as a therapist, it's hard to walk that line between what do we truly believe is the best way versus what is expected and appropriate in a certain culture.
Yeah.
It's hard.
How do you meet somebody culturally without imposing your culture onto them?
I think we talked about bracketing in our last episode.
We did talk about bracketing.
It's that idea of while you're still maintaining your own values, you're not bringing them into the room. You are meeting the client where they are with their values, be that familial or cultural or whatever, and centering their experience.
Yeah. So it's really such a balance, and it can get sticky when it comes to things like parenting, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another thing that I would want to bring up just before we wrap up is that your parents' parenting styles between both parents can be different.
Ooh, yeah.
So maybe, like we were saying, in certain dynamics where it's a more patriarchal context, maybe dad is authoritarian and mom is permissive.
Or maybe one is neglectful and the other one is authoritarian or authoritative. You can have a mix and match. And also, your parents' style can evolve throughout your childhood.
Yes.
It can evolve based on what period of life you're in, how you're acting as a kid, where they are in life. You can have an evolution between a parent-child relationship.
Absolutely. Because parents change. Because, again, they're still human. So they can shift based on the situation, based on context, based on things happening in the home. And it can also change based on child.
Yes, so one parent can have a different style based on the child that they're dealing with. I know my relationship with my parents is very different than my sister's relationship with my parents.
Yeah.
Not to classify either into a certain style necessarily, but we know that every child requires something different. So likely a parent's style will not be exactly the same between children.
Yeah. Also, with gender roles, there are different expectations placed onto boys and onto girls. So the way that we parent boys and girls can look different.
Oh, yeah, wait, that's for another time, but the double standard between parenting daughters and parenting sons can be very apparent sometimes.
Yeah.
Ha, no pun intended. Apparent.
Apparent. So if you have listened to this episode and you're thinking in your head, man, I have been parenting my kids so wrong, or wow, my parents didn't effectively parent me maybe in the ways that I needed them to. One thing that I want you to take away is that compassion, that this has brought a level of understanding. And we can give compassion to ourselves for not having the tools when we needed them, and we can give compassion to our parents because they likely did not have the tools that they needed in order to parent effectively.
Yeah. And just remembering, if you are planning to become a parent or you have young children, you will make mistakes.
Yes.
You will mess them up, and that is a part of life.
That's just what happens, and it potentially might build resilience for your kids.
Yeah. Anything else to wrap this up? This feels so nice to be back in the studio.
I know.
I feel like it's been so long between the plague and we took a week off for our break between... and for finals. So there's been a lot going on. How are you generally in life?
Generally, I'm good. I feel a little bit overwhelmed right now.
Yeah.
Having started practicum, and our summer sessions are just so fast.
Yes, summer goes really... the schedule is different than our normal semesters, so the classes go very, very quickly.
And since I've been dealing with the plague, I missed a day of classes, so...
I feel like I should be wearing one of those medieval, beaks with, the garlic in the nose, that they used to wear. But I'm glad you're feeling better.
Thank you. Yeah, and I am feeling better, so...
Yeah. All right, everybody. We hope you enjoyed this. Please get in touch. Therapy in Progress Pod.
Yeah, we would love to know your thoughts on this episode and any other episodes that you've heard. Make sure you go back to our attachment styles episode, listen in on that if you're more curious about how that plays in to how you move through the world and how you connect with other people.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
I'm Myelene.
And I'm Michael.
Thanks for coming to class with us.
This has been Therapy in Progress. We will talk to you next time.
See you soon. Bye. Therapy in Progress is produced for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to substitute for professional medical or mental health care.
Views expressed here are our own. If you're in need of support, we encourage you to reach out to a licensed professional.
Your mental health matters. Talk to you next time.